To make a long story short, both of our vehicles ended up at the bottom of this really rocky ravine, like this canyon. And we couldn't either make it back the way we came or to get up the other side. Got totally stranded and had to, thankfully we had these satellite devices, had to send an emergency distress text and to the American and British embassies in the capital of Mongolia on the other side of the country, and they had to dispatch the Mongolian National Emergency Management Agency to come rescue us.
Welcome to the Where Have You Been podcast. I'm your host, Bill Ream, and each week on the pod, I have conversations with incredible guests from all walks of life. Expect to hear funny, crazy, emotional, life-changing, and even sometimes life-threatening stories and experiences that will entertain and inspire you. As always, I appreciate your likes, subscriptions, ratings, and reviews wherever you are listening. It doesn't sound like much, but it truly helps the pod get to the ears of more people who may enjoy it. And check out the website, whybpodcast.com, for links to the socials where you can find pictures from the guests and their stories, and also buy merch if you're so inclined. Now let's get to this week's episode. Thank you for being here. Welcome into yet another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast. I'm not going to try to put any pressure on my guest today, but I think this may be one of the most exciting, or at least some of the most bizarre and crazy and just totally out there stories, along with probably some more normal ones. But I think you're going to be really, really thrilled and you're really going to enjoy this episode today. And without further ado, I'm going to let my guest introduce himself. I have Scott on the podcast today. Scott, if you'd be so kind as to tell the listeners, who are you?
Sure. My name is Scott Gurian. I live in northern New Jersey, just outside of New York. I'm a journalist. I worked in public radio for many years. I've done some print reporting. Nowadays, I mostly work in podcasts. I produce a documentary podcast I've been making since 2016 called Far From Home, where I report interesting stories from my travels around the world. I've traveled a fair amount, and I'm always interested in kind of venturing a little bit outside of my comfort zone, going to places that the average Westerner tourist, visitor would not go to. I guess we'll talk a little bit about on the first season of my podcast, which launched the whole thing. I actually drove in a little tiny car 18,000 miles from the UK to Mongolia and back through, I think, 21 countries, I believe. So I have lots of stories from that and other stories from my ongoing travels that I could share with you and your listeners.
I think most of what you said there was understated. We'll get into that. But I want to touch on as we're talking about you, who you are, what you're doing. You've done a lot with like the journalistic side, even in your early career. Like that's what you were doing in that area, New Jersey, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've worked in public radio for many years. I've done stuff for NPR, National Public Radio, for the BBC, for other places like that. I was news director of a small station near Oklahoma City randomly for about 5 years. I've worked in New York. I worked in Washington, D.C. I spent a few years after Superstorm Sandy, which hit our area, the New York area, pretty badly in 2012. I spent a few years doing like investigative reporting after that, following the federal aid money, rebuilding our state. But I realized at a certain point, of all the different types of reporting and journalism I had done, the most fascinating stories were always when I was in another country, in another culture, and exploring and kind of just getting a sensory overload of new experiences and exposures to other cultures and everything. And I've always kind of had this dream of being like a foreign correspondent kind of person. And so at a certain point, I decided that's what I really wanted to focus on in my work. So I really do a lot of international reporting. And then when I'm not doing that just to pay the bills, I have some other work where I help produce some other podcasts, like this kids podcast I'm an editor and producer for, but it's the kind of stuff that I could do remotely from anywhere in the world with my laptop and an internet connection. So it's kind of some steady work that I can do while I'm traveling around the world, pursuing my real passion.
Excellent. And I wanted to add, before I get into like all the travel talk, I guess, you mentioned the podcast itself. People can find that, I assume, on all major platforms. Yep. But where else can they find you? Do you have socials? Do you have a website?
Yeah, it's just, again, the show is called Far From Home. My website is farfromhomepodcast.org. I'm on all the podcast platforms. If people just look up Far From Home, there are a few other small imposter podcasts, which have unfortunately taken my name. If you look for Far From Home, and the logo is like a road sign with a question mark, like I'm lost as I perpetually am. And yeah, people could just find me at Far From Home podcast on Instagram or Facebook, or I guess I'm now on Blue Sky as well. I haven't really used it much. So yeah, all the places.
Yeah. I found the same thing with Blue Sky. I kind of dipped my toe in, and I haven't really explored it much, but we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, we'll
So,
see.
so when did travel, it doesn't sound like necessarily like travel, I'm sorry, that your early work took you outside of the country for traveling. It sounds like that's something you kind of did on your own, but I'm just guessing. When did travel really become a thing for you in your life?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a mixed story. I did. So my brother and I were raised by our mother. Our parents got divorced when we were young, and our mother was always kind of adventurous, and just even in small things in life, coming back from the grocery store, and she would buy the blue potatoes because they look more interesting than the white potatoes, or just small things like that, like instilling in us this sense of wonder and curiosity about the world. And we did some traveling when we were younger. At a certain point, my mom got into scuba diving, and so she took us snorkeling and scuba diving mostly around the Caribbean. So I've been to a bunch of Caribbean islands, but um, haven't we never really traveled like extensively aside from that. We did. I mean, we went to Belize once, which was cool. So we went snorkeling there, and I said, well, if we're going there anyway, I'd like to see some of the rest of the country. And I was probably 12, 13 years old at that point or something. But so we, stayed over in the rainforest as well, and went horseback riding through the jungle, and saw some Mayan ruins, and But aside from that, yeah, we didn't do a ton of traveling growing up. But again, just having that kind of those building blocks of just curiosity about the world that were instilled in us. And initially, I actually wasn't that excited or interested in travel for some reason. I remember back like in high school where there was like a Spanish, exchange in Mexico, and my mom had, spent some time in Mexico. That's actually where my parents met, because my mom was into like art history and like archaeology. And so my mom thought, oh, I heard about this exchange. I'm like, oh, I heard about it, but I don't think I'm going to do it. And she almost had to like twist my arm. She's like, no, I think it would be good for you. You should go. And it was a great experience. But yeah, that initially, yeah, I just, for whatever reason, I didn't really think of the idea, or even in college where I had the opportunity to study abroad. Like my college actually had a campus. It was like a castle in the Netherlands where I could have spent a semester, which in
Wow.
retrospect, that would have been amazing. But I don't know, just the thought never really occurred to me. And I'm kicking myself now. I really wish I had done that. So yeah, it was kind of a slow start for me. I think probably the one thing I could point to where it really changed was I forget whether it was my junior or my senior year of college, where I met these filmmakers who were they were documentary filmmakers, and they were making this film about the Zapatista Indians, who were like this rebel indigenous tribe in Mexico. And at that point, around 2000, they're these people. They wear like these balaclavas, concealing your identity. If anyone remembers old like Rage Against the Machine music videos or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that you'd see them in
Yep.
there. And so they were making demands on the Mexican government at that point, calling for more indigenous rights. And it just so happened that the dates lined up during my spring break from college that year, that they were had this huge caravan going all around the country of Mexico, eventually converging on the Zocalo, like this enormous square in the center of Mexico City, where the federal government is, with this giant rally calling for indigenous rights. And so I flew down there to Mexico during my spring break. The filmmaker friends had already been down there. They were like traveling around. They found some seats on. There was this like school bus of this group called Schools for Chiapas. Chiapas is the southernmost poorest state in Mexico. And so they were traveling around on this school bus as part of this. I just had like the rough itinerary of this caravan, where it was going to be what days. And so I flew down to Mexico myself, intending to kind of meet them somewhere along the path of this caravan. I still don't speak, I'm still not totally fluent in Spanish. I could kind of get by, but at that point I spoke even less, just some, a little bit of high school Spanish I had learned. Um, didn't really have much of a plan, just had this rough itinerary. I fly to Mexico City, stay overnight in a hotel near the airport, and then set out the next day for like the capital of the Mexican state where I saw this caravan would be. and I'm just asking people in my broken Spanish, like, do you know where the Zapatistas are? And then I took like a bus to another like smaller city that was closer to where apparently they were. And I was getting, and I had way too much luggage. I had this enormous duffel bag and then a giant hiking backpack and like way too much stuff. I overpacked. This is before smartphones and everything, so I like rented a cell phone from the airport in Mexico City, and I was like I was doing reporting. I was calling in for like several, like the local radio station I was volunteering with in Boston when I was in school, and then also for this national like Pacifica Radio, which is like this left wing like political talk show, Democracy Now. And so I was like calling into them from Mexico like several times throughout the week I was down there doing these like live reports on this borrowed cell phone from the airport. At the end of the week, I brought it back to the airport and had a $2,000 cell phone bill.
Oh my gosh.
I had no idea what I was doing. I was in so over my head. I was what, like an 18-year-old kid, or no, I was in college, so 22 or something. And totally in over my head, but I was just kind of figuring it out. And it was like the coolest experience of my life, like traveling around with this group in this, middle of Mexico, and, seeing the country was really beautiful. I'd been in there once on this, the Mexican exchange, but this was my second time in Mexico, and getting to see the countryside, getting to see, all these political rallies, and then the final day ending up in the Zocalo in Mexico City. And I was staying like at a hostel right on the square there. And I remember going out at like 6 a.m. and the square is totally dead. And, there's just some old ladies pushing carts around with like breakfast tamales serving to people. And I remember, just having a sense like within a few hours, like this square is going to be filled with people for this giant rally. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, a few hours later, there were like 300,000 people in this square.
Oh my
and I
gosh.
was like reporting on this thing that, and these reports, was this 22-year-old kid were going across the country in the US. And it was just the most amazing experience. And I was like, wow, like I want to do more of this kind of thing. And that really planted the seed. And ever since then, I was like thinking, yeah, I want to make my life's work doing this.
And so that also probably birthed your love of traveling across countries in vehicles. So that's good.
I suppose so. Yeah. I mean, I like if you're driving yourself, you can stop wherever you want. You can like that, a lot of times if you're on a bus or a train or something, like you're going, and I like trains as well, but you're going super fast and you just don't have that luxury of, there's a cool little place, I want to stop and check it out. Or, maybe I want to go at my own pace and not the pace of the schedule of when the buses and trains, arrive and leave. Yeah, I mean, driving's cool to, you could stop wherever you want. And my dream is I've actually been talking to someone I met to drive across South America at some point. I think would be amazing. Or not across, but north to south or south to north. Yeah, no, I think driving is a great way I've heard of people also who bicycle or walk. I don't think I have the patience for the stamina for that. But I'm content with driving.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. The only thing I'd say about when you're actually behind the wheel is it's a little bit harder to just see things sometimes as if you're the passenger, but yeah. Either way, yeah, if you're in control or whatever, it's the same. So once you became a journalist and whether you were spending time, whether it was in DC or Oklahoma or even back home, New Jersey area, did you kind of over that time period, did you have like a noticeably like nagging feeling like this, I need to start doing this because I want to travel and do this like the whole time? Or
no, I wouldn't say the whole time. I mean, I was content with, the work I was doing here. I mean, I was just starting out, as a journalist and had to kind of get started somewhere. And I mean, in a way, moving to Oklahoma from New Jersey was a bit of an adventure. That was a little bit of culture shock, and it's a very different part of the country. And so that was all new to me. And there's just exploring. I mean, I feel like wherever you are, you can find interesting things, even during the pandemic when I wasn't really traveling at all. And I was just here in New Jersey. But I did an episode of my podcast is called Far From Home. I did an episode called Close to Home where I went with some friends and we were exploring like the storm drain tunnels in the next nearby town. So I feel like there's adventures even close to home you can go on.
Did you find anything interesting in the storm drain tunnels?
I've actually done it a few times now. There was like a rat or something at some point, but it's cool because it's like going. It's like the tunnels that it's like a little brook, and then it's like turned into like an underground tunnel, and it goes like under this huge like parking lot and under the mall. And there's this one stretch where you're walking like a quarter of a mile in the darkness, and you have to have headlamps and everything. It's like super cool, but
Wow.
yeah, but no, so wherever you go, and yeah, even in Oklahoma, I mean, it's a very different culture than New Jersey. And so it was a small station, so I got to do a little bit of everything, which was great. And so some days I'd put on a jacket and tie and have to go to a press conference with the governor at the Capitol, but then I'd go to a rattlesnake festival in Southwest Oklahoma and do a story about that. Or, obviously tornadoes are a big thing out there, and they had all kinds of severe weather actually. Or I don't know, just all kinds of fascinating things. There's these giant catfish, like 50, 60-pound catfish that live along the muddy banks of like rivers there. And there's this sport called noodling where these guys like they feel along the banks with like a pole or with their hands, and they find like during spawning season where the fish live in these dens or whatever, they dig in the mud,
Mm-hmm.
and the guys actually reach in and the fish
Mm-hmm.
bites down on their hand, and that's how they catch the fish, with their hands basically.
I've seen
And
it. I've actually
it's
seen it on TV.
there's been documentaries made about it. Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's pretty dangerous. People have like died doing this. But so I got to kind of, that was an interesting cultural phenomenon. I got to experience, and I did a whole story about that.
But you did not try that.
The guy caught the fish, and then he put a hook through it, and then he handed me the line to pull it in. And so
Okay.
I did a story that's actually, I released that on my I re-released it a few years ago on my podcast. So yeah, no, so I feel like wherever you are, even when I wasn't traveling abroad in some far-flung country somewhere, I was still having adventures even close to home. But yeah, definitely over time, I felt like I really wanted to experience a totally different culture in a totally different country. So yeah, I feel like I was content here for a while, especially as I was just starting out my career, making a name for myself, getting some experience, building my resume. But at a certain point, I kind of wanted to go out on my own and really kind of get out there. So yeah, I've
Yeah.
been wanting to do that more and more.
So before I get into the bulk of the episode, actually getting into the real travel stories, my last question is: was the Mongol Rally, which we'll talk about, was that the first real international? That was the first thing you did. Like
Reporting wise,
like once you decided I'm done here in New Jersey.
yeah, I think so. I mean, that was what I kind of did to kind of launch my podcast. I had done
Yeah.
little bits
Okay.
of international reporting before then, but then just to give people the story. So my brother and I we at a certain point we decided to like take a big trip every year over like Christmas and New Year's, because we didn't have a lot of close family left in the area, and rather than just sit home over the holidays over Christmas dinner ourselves, we figured we might as well go somewhere interesting. So we started traveling every year. One year we went to Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands. We went to Thailand and Cambodia and Angkor Wat. We went to Alaska and we went dog sledding, which was really cool. And one year we went to Cuba. We don't usually do like tours, guided tours, but we figured in Cuba, just logistics of getting around it would be a little easier. So we went on a tour there, and we kind of had some issues with our tour group, and the guide kind of got drunk and abandoned our group one evening. And so all of us in the tour group kind of bonded in the absence of a tour guide. He eventually came back. But
Nice.
so we kept in touch afterwards. We set up a Facebook group, and I'm still in touch with some of the people from that tour. And among the participants was this woman, Rosie, and her husband, Alan. They're both originally British, but they now live in Western Australia. And Rosie's, a fair amount older than either of us. She's like middle-aged, but she's very adventurous. And a number of months after we returned from Cuba, she reached out to my brother and me, and she said, "Hey, I'm planning this crazy trip with my best friend, childhood friend Jane, and we're planning on doing this event. It's called the Mongol Rally, for charity. We're going to drive in a little tiny car from the UK to Mongolia, about 11,000 miles through, 18, 19 countries, whatever. Would you and your brother be interested in joining us?" And I'd heard when we first met Rosie in Cuba, like she had told me about this trip she was taking, and I'd read about it or heard about it somewhere, because that this is a thing that happens. And when she said it, she's like, I thought, oh, that's really cool. That's amazing. But again, this is kind of like back when I was in high school or whatever, where I wasn't, the thought never occurred to me go on the Mexican exchange. She said it, and I never thought, my first thought wasn't, oh, like I could do this too. It was just like, oh, that's pretty cool. But then she actually reached out to my brother and me. She said, hey, would the two of you like to join us on this trip? And then I was like, well, duh, like, why didn't I think about that? I was like, yeah, actually, that would be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a journalist. Like, this would be perfect to like launch a podcast documenting a journey like this. Not just the trip itself, but just all the planning that goes into, as you can imagine, a journey like that. That ended up taking us about 7 weeks. And just what kind of car do you buy for a journey like that? How do you prepare? What do you pack? Planning the route, getting all the visas, learning. We took a basic like first aid class, learning basic car repairs. Like, there's like so much months and months of planning that went into that. And then, of course, the story of the journey itself and documenting that all, not just talking about it, but actually bringing along a recorder and documenting it along the way. I feel like that's the power of audio, that you could just listen from wherever you are, and it like transports you to a place. It's like movies for your ears, kind of what I create. And so that's
Absolutely
what I did.
does.
Yeah.
Absolutely does. Well, this is the perfect point then. I think this is the natural spot for me to say. And we can either jump right into what you did with the Mongol Rally. If you want to kind of list a few places, it's up to you. It's your show. Scott Gurian, where have you been?
Yeah, okay, well, so on that journey, I think it's been a number of years now. I think it was 21 countries, 23 countries, something like that. So we started out in the UK and then drove southeast across Europe, which, that was the kind of the easy part. And then,
Easy, except for the fact that you're driving a
yeah,
stick
well,
shift that you'd never.
yes, yeah. I mean, the part of the rules of the event where they make you take a little tiny car, they actually limit the size of the engine because, in theory, if you have a little tiny car that's totally unsuitable for a trip across Europe and Asia, your car will inevitably break down and you'll be forced to interact with the locals and have more of an adventure instead of just
Mhm.
zooming past, which I totally get. I think that all makes sense, is well and good in theory. The problem is we just had so many issues with our particular car. We had a Nissan Micro, which is a little tiny hatchback. If people have spent any time in Europe, they probably know what it is. They don't have them in the US, I don't believe. And yeah, our particular car, we had so much trouble that we basically ended up broken down or at a mechanic in every country beginning in Bulgaria, I believe, Romania or Bulgaria, with the exception of Kyrgyzstan. It was such a time suck and a money pit, and we just wasted so much time at yet another mechanic waiting for some part or to get something fixed, that I much rather would have spent interacting with the locals and seeing more places and everything. So that was really a bummer. Our friends had the exact same car as us, I think a different year, but they had hardly any issues at all with their car, so we just got terribly unlucky. So yes, there was definitely that complication of the car trouble, and then also just the fact that it was manual. My brother and I had never driven stick. So that was kind of a crash course we had to take. And also because we bought the car in the UK, the steering wheel was on the right. And then once we cross out of the UK, go through the channel into mainland Europe, then we're driving on the right side with a right hand steering wheel. So if I'm
So
driving,
crazy.
my brother has to be in the passenger seat. If we're behind a big truck, I have to have him look around and tell me, is it safe to pass?
Oh my
So that
gosh.
was fun.
Jeez.
So yeah, but okay, so yeah, but aside, all that aside, if it's possible to put all that aside,
Yeah.
going across Europe was pretty uneventful. It definitely became more interesting once we crossed into like Eastern Europe, getting in, like crossing the border into Romania, and then I felt like right away like we're kind of entering the old world. Like the highway just suddenly ends. There's like barricades ahead. I think they ran out of money to finish building the highway, and we were sent off on this side road, and suddenly we're driving past like old ladies with babushkas, like with a giant bundle of carrots like she just dug up from her garden, and it truly feels like the old world. So that was really cool. I'd love to go back and spend some more time in Romania and Bulgaria. And then we got to the border of Turkey, and this is just really bad timing. Summer of 2016, or I guess it was July. I don't remember what month it was, but 2016. Like we showed up at the border to enter Turkey through no fault of our own. It was like, I think, 6 days after there had been an attempted coup in Turkey. So a lot of like scrambling around at the last minute to figure out, is it still safe to go? What other options do we have? Do we even have other options? Like, could we put the car on some kind of ferry across the Black Sea and bypass Turkey, or do we drive north through part of Russia, but then our visa through Russia only allows us, because we'd have to go through Russia a couple more times in the journey, and how many times can we enter and exit Russia with our visa? And if we go that way, then we've got to, entering back to Europe, we've got to go through Chechnya. Like maybe that's not a good idea. And so it's just so many things, constantly looking at maps, weighing our options, looking online, a lot of scrambling at the last minute. in the end, we just reached out to, it's hard when you hear news from afar and you're hearing headlines, and it's just hard to know, like, what is the situation actually like on the ground? Because if you're just
Mhm.
hearing the news, it sounds, the world seems like a big, bad, scary place.
Yeah.
So you really need to like reach out to locals on the ground, and that's where something like social media comes in handy. Just friends of friends, like, does anyone know anyone in Turkey? And if you have 1,000 friends or whatever on Facebook, you're inevitably someone will know someone. And so, yeah, we just spoke to some people there, and they said, well, yeah, there was this attempted coup, but the government like cracked down pretty quickly, and things seem like they're okay now. And we think you'll be okay. You don't have to worry. So we, just to be extra cautious, we purposely kind of zoomed across much of Turkey. We skipped Istanbul and Ankara, which is a bummer. I still haven't been to Istanbul, and I really want to go. It's been on my bucket list forever. But we just kind of zoomed across much of Turkey. We did go to Cappadocia, which was amazing, in kind of south central Turkey, where there's these giant like cave homes, like prehistoric people been living in for millennia. And
Wow.
they launch these giant hot air balloons every morning. It's just incredibly scenic, and it's kind of a magical place. So that was amazing. And then after Turkey, trying to remember the order here, we went across Iran, which was fascinating as an American tourist driving across Iran. You have to, if you're American, a Brit, or a Canadian, you have to hire a guide to take you through in order to get a visa. But he really was just a guide, he wasn't like a government minder or anything. So we had a tour guide. We took our time through Iran because we figured, are we ever going to go back there?
Right.
So we got to really kind of do a little bit of touring around, getting to see a lot of the country, which was amazing. Friendliest people I've ever met in all my travels. They were so excited to meet Americans. They'd never met Americans before. They wanted to practice their English, and just this sense of Persian hospitality, total strangers meeting you, and suddenly they want to, you strike up a conversation with them, and after 5 minutes, 10 minutes of chatting, they want to invite you to their home, come for tea, come for dinner, meet their families, stay with them. It's just incredible.
That's awesome.
It's a fascinating place. And then after Iran, then we went to Turkmenistan, which is like the second most authoritarian country in the world after North Korea. A very strange place, a place that very few tourists get to go to. So that was really interesting. And we camped out at a giant pit of fire in the middle of the desert. It's just natural gas escaping from the ground. That's
Which
been burning.
sounded awesome.
Yeah, it's been burning for like 40 years now or something. And it's like as wide as a football field, and it's just really cool. And yeah, but a very odd country. And while we were there, we were, like I said, we were having car trouble all along the way. Radiator problems at first, which is not good when you're in the middle of the desert, and your car overheats. It was like 120 degrees especially in Turkmenistan, the desert there. It's like, I think they say the driest desert in the world. And our little car, because it was from the UK, and it doesn't tend to get super hot in the UK, and it has so little horsepower, it actually didn't have air conditioning. So we're driving across the desert just with the windows rolled down as much as possible, all the way. We have these like cooling towels around our necks that you like wet, and then you snap them, and they kind of cool. They help a little bit, but it was like 120 degrees every day. It was not pleasant. And then we blew our head gasket in eastern Turkmenistan, which is like one of the worst things possible that can go wrong with a car. And they, because they only give you a 5-day transit visa to drive across the country to begin with, and they didn't want to extend our visa. Or I think they said they would extend ours, but they wouldn't extend our friends. Our friends were driving with us in a separate car, and we didn't want to split up, off from them. So we ended up having to put the car on the back of a flatbed truck and get it towed 6 hours to the border, cross over into Uzbekistan, and then wait a week for a new head gasket to get shipped from Dubai, which was fun.
I mean,
So
this all just sounds so insane.
you can't make this stuff
And
up.
you're not even like really getting into the details. Like,
Yeah,
this is
yeah. This is
it's
the thumbnail
crazy.
version. People have to listen to my podcast Far From Home the whole first season to hear all the details and actually
Yeah.
hear the sound of all this as it's happening, as I recorded it.
I'm kind of upset that I kind of wish I hadn't listened to it, because
Yeah,
like my jaw drops a little bit already when you're saying it, even though I've already heard, some
yeah,
of the details. But you have to listen to it. Everyone, go.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
incredible.
It was an amazing adventure. It was an amazing
Anyways,
adventure.
so I'm sorry to jump in, but you were
Yeah,
in
well,
Uzbekistan, I think.
Uzbekistan then, and then yes, we drove all across Central Asia, which is not an area of the world that most Westerners get to go to. All these countries, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, like this was a black hole in my geographic knowledge before I went there. It's like the borders kind of snake around each other, and I just knew nothing at all about this part of the world, nor do most people. people. So I feel very lucky that I was able to get to see this area and actually drive through it. I mean, to really get to see these places well. And just the amazing mountains in Tajikistan, the Pamir mountain range, where at one point we're driving for a few days, like right along the border, along Afghanistan. It's like right across the river from us. Like we're within shouting distance of some people on the other side. And just incredible scenery in Tajikistan, and all the wild horses in Kyrgyzstan. And unfortunately, because we had so much car trouble, we spent so much time broken down getting our car fixed. So that kind of, screwed up our schedule a little bit. So then we had to unfortunately race through some of these places a little bit faster than I would have liked. I would have loved to have gone at a much more leisurely pace, to have done more exploring. So I guess I just have to go back at some point. But yeah, Kazakhstan, people don't realize how big it is. It's an enormous country. It's probably was the least interesting of the stands, I thought. Just a lot of it's just the steppe. It's just long, flat, straight roads, and you're driving forever and ever. It's probably like going through, I don't know, Nevada or Utah or somewhere. Like you're like struggling to keep your eyes open, and especially after coming from these beautiful mountains with these winding roads in Tajikistan, and driving along the side of the cliff, and then suddenly you're driving on this long, flat road, and it's incredibly boring.
Well, the only good thing for that is Big Red probably really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I'm sure our car, yeah. Though the roads were still, in one point in particular, I'm remembering north of the city of Almaty, there was this one stretch of road which had so many potholes, and our struts and shocks and everything were already in pretty bad shape at that point. And I think that road probably didn't help, where later on in Mongolia, we ended up just cracking I think they call it the wishbone that connects the rear wheels to the body of the car or whatever. The wheel
the
just
axle
bowed in the axle. Yeah. So and then so a little bit of Russia, and then we end up in Mongolia, and a fascinating place. This population density of any country in the world. You just drive for miles and miles, without seeing any other people. And I guess it's kind of like Montana, like they say Montana, big sky country, like the enormous sky around you. And very not a lot of, I mean, I think things maybe have changed since we've been there, but when we were there in 2016, much of, like, you look at a map of the country and you see like a road going east and west in the north and one in the south, and like these are the only roads that go east and west across the country. And Mongolia is a pretty big country. Not only are, they're the main roads, but not only are they not paved for much of the way, or they weren't at that time, but they're in many places just like tracks through the sand and grass, and you're just like trying to follow the tracks of whatever vehicle went ahead of you. And there were no signs, not even signs in Russian or Mongolian, just like no signs at all. And so oftentimes like the road would split 3 or 4 different ways, and you just have to like flip a coin, like which way do I go?
Yeah, which part is the dry riverbed and which part is the road?
Yeah. There were riverbeds, and they weren't all dry. Then we had to drive across.
Oh, that's right.
And we were trying to use, we have like 3 different paper maps we're constantly comparing, and we have, GPS from like Google Maps, which, I mean, there's no cell service in most places, but if you start Google Maps, it'll continue to guide you. But like a lot of the area just hadn't been mapped very well, a lot of the country. So we're trying to do that. And then we had like a satellite GPS with this device we had. And even despite, these 5 different maps that we were constantly comparing, we would still get lost. And to make a long story short, we ended up, we got stuck one day we try to do this river crossing, and then we had to have a truck come and pull us out because our little tiny car is incapable of going through very deep water. And there's just a little river ahead of you, and you just got to drive across it. That's the only way to get to the other side. And so we saw another river crossing coming up ahead, and we're looking on the map, and then we saw a little path that went off to the right. We figured, we could go that way, and it looks like maybe we could kind of avoid the river crossing, and we could join the main road later on, which is all well and good if it's flat terrain, but it was very hilly there, and our little tiny car has very little horsepower, and we just barely managed to make it up to the top of this hill. And then once we went down the other side, we were like, okay, we have to keep going because there's no way we're going to be able to get back the way we came. And to make a long story short, both of our vehicles ended up at the bottom of this really rocky ravine, like this canyon, and we couldn't either make it back the way we came or to get up the other side. It got totally stranded, and thankfully we had these satellite devices, had to send an emergency distress text to the American and British embassies in the capital of Mongolia on the other side of the country, and they had to dispatch the Mongolian National Emergency Management Agency to come rescue us. And yeah, so that was an adventure. And again, listen to my podcast for all the details. And a few months after we got home, the embassy sent us a photo of the American ambassador to Mongolia at the time, Jennifer Gall, presenting a certificate of appreciation to the head of the Mongolian National Emergency Management Agency for rescuing us. We were apparently the first American drivers they had ever rescued. So we caused a bit of an international incident and made history.
I don't think that's a distinction that you want.
No,
But
probably not.
but at least I mean the alternative would have been terrible. I'm glad you were rescued at least. But
Yes, yes,
I love this. I don't know why. For some reason, it touched me so much. The story about the empty shack at the top,
yes.
and you guys decided to set up camp because it was empty.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like there were some storm clouds coming in, and we were afraid we'd get trapped in the rain. And rather than just sit in our cars, we saw this like empty shack there. It was like boarded up. So we took off the boards. There's like no one around for miles and miles, and we just like, okay, maybe we could kind of camp out here or something. So we broke in, like set up the tents inside this shack that had like a dirt floor, and then we're there a little bit, and then this
Making
nomadic
food,
Mongolian guy comes. Huh?
making
Sorry.
tea. I think
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
making
So
tea,
we
making
started making
food, kind
tea. We
of.
had a little burner, making some soup or something, boiling some
Yeah,
water. And then this like nomadic Mongolian guy shows up out of nowhere on horseback. And he doesn't speak any English. We don't speak any Mongolian or Russian, so we're doing our best to communicate. And the best we could understand, it seemed like this was either his place or he was planning on staying there or something. So we had like broken into his house or something, and so we're with our British friends, so they offer him tea, and it was just kind of incredibly awkward and just funny when we kind of realized that might have been what was happening. He was very gracious, and he eventually said goodbye and went on his way, rode off into the sunset on his horse. That was
so
a very funny
crazy.
experience.
So I mean, unfortunately, we spoil it here because I didn't truly know going in if you indeed made it or not. So unfortunately, now
I'm still
everyone
here, I'm alive, I'm
everyone
talking
knows.
to you, so you know
Right, but
that.
I mean, if you finished the Mongol Rally itself,
Yeah, and
um,
there were many moments where we highly doubted whether we would. We seriously debated throwing in the towel on multiple occasions.
yeah, your
But
brother
it
more
said it.
so than you. It sounded like, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at a certain point, it's like sunk cost. You've come this far, and how could you just give up and go home? Like what? You'd never forgive yourself.
yeah. Well, especially when your $500 or $600 car ended up costing you thousands
Yeah, yeah. Like, what would
for
be the point to
disposable.
just get rid of it at that? Once you start spending money on it, like you kind of have to keep going. And it was totally worth it. I mean, I'm really glad. I would really be annoyed if I would still be regretting it if we hadn't gone all the way.
Yeah, it is awesome. I mean, it's really an awesome story. Do you have? Is there anything? I don't know how long it's been since like. I know it's been a long time since you put together that first season of the
Mhm.
podcast, but I don't know how long it's been since you've listened back or how much you remember of the specific stories that you told. Are there
I
any stories
yeah.
that kind of maybe you didn't have the recorder on or anything that happened that's not in that first season that you remember that was really
I captured most of it. I mean, I was trying to record nonstop to the extent that it was really annoying my brother and my friends, but they got used to it after a while. I was like, okay, there's Scott recording again. Because there were, this was an emotional journey, with constant breakdowns and everything, and there was crying, tears, and in multiple instances.
and
But at a
some
certain,
beautiful highlights too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, at a certain point, I mean, that's the goal of any good reporter in any situation. Hopefully, if you spend enough time, even if it's with total strangers, hopefully you become like a fly on the wall, and then they almost forget that the recorder is there. And it's easier with just audio. I think it's harder if you have a camera, obviously.
Sure.
But so I've recorded 95% of everything I wanted. I mean, certainly there were some small moments, and they weren't terribly significant, but I remember, for example, there was when we showed up in eastern Tajikistan at this city Murgab, which it felt like a city on the edge of the world. Like it almost felt like an Alaskan fishing village or something. I don't know. It was just this odd place, kind of near the border of China, and it's just way out there in the absolute middle of nowhere. And we showed up like late at night and to like the one hotel in town, and we got to the desk, and like the last room had just been taken, and like we somehow, like our friends Rosie and Jane, kind of sweet talked the desk attendant into like there's this one room where they just put this other traveler in, and they like talked him into moving him into a room with like three other random strangers who like the one guy like was talking to himself or he had some issues or whatever. We felt bad for this guy. We're like putting him in this random room, but we needed a room for ourselves.
Right.
And it was this very funny moment. And it was like one of those instances like, damn, as much as I'm trying to record every moment, like that was one moment where I should have been recording then. And, but at a certain point you're so exhausted driving all day and you're just not, even thinking about, okay, I need to be rolling tape at this moment. So that was one little thing. But I know there were some other little moments as well that at the time I was like really regretting, or maybe I screwed up something. I thought I was recording and I wasn't, or something like that.
Yeah.
But I captured the majority of everything.
Or anything that maybe you captured and for whatever reason decided to not include, because I'm sure you had to do a
Um,
lot of selective editing and maybe not. I mean, there was no time restrictions, or you did that to yourself, right? I mean, you chose
yeah, I mean, I
the
went on
length and
as
the
long as it was. It ended up, was it 24 episodes or something? I think it was the longest podcast season ever. But yeah, I mean, there was clearly a lot of, as much as long as it was, there
yeah.
was definitely a lot of tape that ended up on the cutting room floor. And yeah, I mean, probably some disagreements I had with my brother. I mean, when you're spending that much time in the car together, we have very different personalities in some ways. And so there were a couple moments where we were kind of at each other's throats, and, which is to be understandable when you're spending weeks on end together in a little tiny confined space.
Yeah.
Certain tensions maybe we already had about different personalities or ways of doing things came out, and I didn't get into all that in the podcast. I touched on it a
Well,
little bit, but
sure.
not as much as I could have. But yeah.
Well, what was maybe a favorite one or two stories from that trip, which were probably in the season that you didn't touch on yet that you love to tell, like, or maybe maybe they stick out the most to you.
In Kazakhstan, we met. So while we were in Iran, we met this woman who was from Kazakhstan, and she had actually come to Iran to get plastic surgery, as people do. And it's really known for plastic surgery because it's a very conservative country. The women have to cover their heads and everything, but it actually apparently has the highest rate of rhinoplasty, like people coming to get nose jobs, of any country in the world, because that's a way that, like, socially or culturally, that the women are allowed to show their beauty. They show their hair, but they can show their noses. So everyone gets nose jobs in Iran.
Wow.
And actually, this woman we met, she wasn't there getting a nose job. I think she was there to get a boob job. You wouldn't think
Nice.
Iran would be the place to do that, but apparently so. But anyway, so we met her there in Iran, and but she was from Kazakhstan, and she said, "Oh, hey, when you come through Kazakhstan on your journey, in a few weeks, you should reach out to me because my family lives." I think she actually she was living in Dubai at that time, but she was from Kazakhstan, and she was going to be back there visiting her family in Almaty, the city there. And so we followed up with her when we were going through Kazakhstan, and we actually stayed with her and her family there. And she took us along to it. Just so happened that some friends of hers were getting married at that time, and so we got to crash a Kazakh wedding. She brought us along,
It's so
which
awesome.
which was interesting. It was in a big banquet hall, and it was a fairly kind of Western as weddings go. I guess it wasn't that different than as much as I was expecting. But yeah, they have all the food out on the table, and they eat a lot of horse meat in Kazakhstan. So they had a lot of horse meat mixed in with other things, and then seeing the traditional dances they did, uh, and then they had a drag performer performing giving entertainment at the wedding, which was unique and interesting. So yeah, that was an interesting cultural experience, and that's what I love, stuff like that, to really immerse yourself in the local culture, because the average tourist is not going to get to crash a wedding in whatever country they go to. So I felt really lucky that we got that experience, and I love experiences like I look for experiences like that in my travels, and if I manage to fall into them, I always feel incredibly privileged.
Oh, of course. I mean, how else would you can't just crash. I mean, maybe you can, but the chances that you're just going to crash a Kazakhstani wedding, like, not
Yeah,
going to
well,
happen.
we
I
heard
mean,
other
not on
stories
your
though.
own, not
Yeah,
without an
I mean,
invite.
well, the great thing again about this is the Mongol Rally, like, because we were driving across these places going at a slow pace. I think spoke to people on one of the other teams that participated in this event, where I think they actually got to go to a wedding in Turkmenistan, of all places, which again is a very closed culture and closed society. And
Wow.
some other guys, I don't know if it was the same people, they met some guy who invited them back to his house, and they all kind of got drunk together and partied or something, which again, it's Turkmenistan's a very closed conservative country. So that was amazing that they had an experience like that. So yeah, I think just the mode of traveling, and people are so curious because it's a place that so few tourists go. So I think the locals were really eager to meet us and strike up conversations. So it was really cool.
Yeah. That it's so awesome. I can't say enough about the whole adventure. Anything else you want to touch on from that adventure before maybe we move on to maybe some more recent travels?
Well, I'll just say so. We drove the 7 weeks all the way to the finish line of this event, which was in Ulan-Ude, Siberia, just north of Mongolia. And then my brother and my friends actually flew home. And I thought that, like, when else am I ever going to be in this part of the world again? So I thought, and most of the people in this event, you can't like leave your car in Russia or Mongolia. You had to like ship it back if you don't drive it. You have to like there was like a railhead there, and so you bring your car to the railhead to the train, like a freight train. You put your car in the train, and it would just get shipped back anywhere in the EU, and then you could either pick the car up on the other end if you wanted to keep it, or it would get sent to a junkyard in, like, I think it was Latvia, just so it was back to the EU, so you didn't have to pay like import fees for the vehicle to leave it in Russia.
Yeah, and
But
here's a twist I did not expect.
yeah, well, so yeah, the twist is that I decided that, again, when else am I ever going to be in this part of the world? I want to drive all the way back. So we had just come 11,000 miles. So I decided, well, I want to go another 7,000 miles. Not the same way we came. That would have been crazy to go that same route.
Especially by yourself.
Yeah, I decided I'll do a more direct route across like Russia, across Siberia. And I actually didn't go by myself. I had a friend who met me who's very adventurous. She was in house sitting for someone in Copenhagen. So she flew out to meet me, and then we drove back together.
Awesome.
Drove across Siberia, which is not the most interesting place in the world. I don't know what I had these romantic notions that it would be driving across like tundra, vast open, whatever. But no, first of all, it was like September, so it wasn't like the middle of the winter. Second of all, we weren't that far north. So it's most of Russia. It's just a 2-lane road across most of the country. It's not like any big highways, but they're well paved. They're in good condition for the most part, at least the part we went. So basically, we started out in Ulan-Ude, which is kind of like the middle of Russia, and we drove back west to Moscow. So we basically drove across half of Russia, which took maybe 2-3 weeks, I want to say. And yeah, it's just a lot of long, flat roads. Like I said, well paved. But I didn't realize how many big cities there are in Russia. But they're all like 12 hours apart from each other. So a lot of long days of driving. And a lot of them, even though there's these cities like in the middle of nowhere, a lot of them are really polluted, which is really sad. And like this one city, Krasnoyarsk, I remember just the smog. I remember driving when we left, like we stayed overnight and leaving the next morning, and like on the road, like we could see maybe 25 feet ahead of us. Like it was just disgusting. It was gross. And I just think they don't have like environmental controls in these places with whatever factories or power plants or whatever. It was just really awful. Yeah, so I did get to go to Tuva, which is really fascinating. Again, it's not a place that hardly any Westerners go because it's way out of the way. And Tuva's where they do Tuvan throat singing. If people have ever heard that, it's almost like a didgeridoo, like sound people make with their, you think their throat, but it actually comes more from their chest. So I got to learn all about the different types of Tuvan throat singing. I did an episode on that on my second season was partially some of the stories from my drive back, and then other stories from my ongoing travels. And so that was really fascinating. We got to see the Tuvan National Orchestra. They played a song just for me and my friend using like just in local like sharpening a knife. That was like an instrument, or like this thing grinding grain made like a rumbling sound. That was an instrument. So that was really cool to see that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then went to Moscow, went to Ukraine. This is again 2016, way before everything going on now. Got to go to Chernobyl and did a story there, which was amazing. It was fascinating, eeriest place I've ever been. And people don't realize it's like a day trip from Kyiv, and you could actually go on tours. There's like tour buses that go up there, and you could actually wander through abandoned buildings that, in 1986, all the people in this village and the surrounding villages were told you have to leave, but don't worry, you can come back in a week or so. And this is decades later. They've never been allowed to return. And so we're walking through like abandoned, like a community center and like a daycare and a nursery, and still
Movie
seeing
theater.
calendars on the wall from 1986. It's like a time capsule, just like, preserved in amber. So
That was a
that
fascinating. I heard that
was,
one too. You went into a
yeah,
movie theater, right? And
yeah,
into the
yeah.
forest a little bit as far as you could go that was
Yeah,
safe.
I mean, obviously the guides, they have Geiger counters. They take tourists there all the time, so they know where. They say that if you're just there for a day or whatever, and there's areas you could like stay on the pavement. Don't go on the grass over there. Like if you walk over there, that's I think they call it the Red Forest. It's like one of the most highly radioactive areas in the world, where incidentally a bunch of Russian soldiers camped out when they were invading Ukraine. The Ukrainians were trying to warn them, don't go there, and the Russians went ahead anyway, and they all got horribly sick and then had to be evacuated into Belarus.
Wow.
But yeah, no, it was apparently just going there for a day or something. It's like about the amount of radiation you would get going to the dentist's office or something like that. But obviously, it's cumulative. If you stayed there for a long time, if you lived there permanently, or if you went in certain areas with higher radiation, then it's clearly not safe to do that. But yeah, fascinating place, really cool. And we just went for the day. They have other tours you could take where you could like stay overnight for a night or two and see even more. Like I hear there's like an abandoned grocery store and like other places you could see, to really get a sense of what this town was. And there's also an abandoned amusement park, which was set to open right on the eve of when the nuclear disaster happened. And so it's super eerie, like seeing the abandoned bumper cars and a Ferris wheel and everything, just like all overgrown with weeds. And it's really crazy. So yeah, definitely a highlight of all of my travels going to Chernobyl.
Yeah. And where else did that trip take you to get back?
I think those are the only stories that I captured on the way back, the Tuva and Chernobyl. But yeah, we just drove. I guess I did a story in Moscow, just speaking to Russians about, like, I met these Russian girls and just talking about the cultural differences between Russians and Americans, and how they said they didn't trust Americans because Americans are smiling all the time and it seems like artificial. That was kind of fascinating to see from a different perspective. But yeah, so just drove across Russia, then in Ukraine, which I really liked Ukraine. I really want to go back there at some point once the war is over. Then across Poland, stayed in Krakow, got to tour. There's these like salt mines in southern Poland, which are super cool, and like caverns. And then let's see, across Germany, stayed with a friend in Berlin. I love Berlin; it's one of my favorite cities. And
Hmm.
Amsterdam. I think was that the first time I was in Amsterdam? I don't recall. Maybe. And then took the car, put the car on a ferry across the North Sea back to the UK. I didn't drive, so I should make it clear. Our car, which had all the problems, I left that at the finish line, stuck it on the train, and I wasn't going to try to drive that one back. I actually drove back our friend Jane and Rosie's car, because Jane lives in the UK, and she said, "Well, if you're going to drive back, drive the car back to my house. I'll keep the car." So I drove it, yeah, all the way back to the UK, and she still had it for several years after that until she eventually donated it to the local technical school where the kids like learned to fix cars. They had actually helped her prepare the car before the journey, and so she donated it back to them in the end.
Nice. Full circle. That's great.
Yeah.
Anything exciting or cool that happened in Amsterdam? I've never been, and it is a place that
Okay.
I would like to check out.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a fascinating. I've been to Amsterdam several times now. I think three times. I mean, it's one of those cities that's super like over touristed, like Barcelona. So yeah, it might be better to go during like the off season or something when it's not overrun. But it's a fascinating place, and then there's also other cities I think in the Netherlands that maybe are similar to Amsterdam, where you could get a taste of that, like with the canals and everything, without all the crowds. I actually hear the same thing in Italy. There's apparently this town a little bit north of Venice that we could kind of get the feel of Venice without being overrun with tourists like Venice itself.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, Amsterdam's a fascinating place, interesting history, and just, I mean, it's unique. There's not many places in the world like that. So yeah, I didn't capture any stories there, though I'm working on a story now in elsewhere in the Netherlands for a future episode of my show, but not in Amsterdam. Actually, it was, let me think. No, I
Well,
guess
even
it
if you didn't
wasn't
capture it,
Amsterdam.
if you captured it in your mind.
Yeah, yeah. No, I did. I spoke to this guy. I'm working on this piece about. There's this group of poets in the Netherlands who, when people there die without any like friends or family, and they end up like they have like paupers graves, the cemetery for, if they don't have, the city just pays for it or whatever. And
Hmm.
so there's this group of poets that they like piece together whatever little bits of information they learn about these people's lives, and then they write and recite a poem at the funeral for this person. So it's a really touching kind of thing. So I went to the cemetery where a bunch of these people were buried, and I interviewed one of the poets and asked her
That's
about that whole
cool.
experience. So that was kind of fascinating.
Very cool. Well, where have you been like more recently then since that mega trip that you were on?
I went to, let's see, well, one of the more fascinating ones was a few years ago. I went only my second time in Africa. I've only been to South Africa, and now I've also been to Algeria because I went to a film festival in a refugee camp in the middle of the Sahara Desert in the very far south, I think southwest corner of Algeria. So it's legally like Algeria, but it's actually a lot of the refugees who fled across the border from Western Sahara, which is now kind of controlled by Morocco. This was a former Spanish territory, and then Spain up and left in, I think, the 1970s, and then Morocco and Algeria. I think Morocco and Algeria both invaded. Algeria left at some point, Morocco stayed. And so it's, yeah, this enormous territory of desert on the northwest corner of the African continent where Morocco has ruled ever since. And Morocco, a lot of it is, I think it's very fertile fishing grounds just off the shore there. So they want to keep it for that and for other
Hmm.
geopolitical reasons. And the people who live there, these native Sahrawi people who are like nomadic people in the desert, have basically had a lot of their rights and freedoms taken away from them, and a lot of them have fled across the border into Algeria. And so there's these enormous refugee camps there that have been there for decades now. And there's this giant, apparently, I think it's the longest man-made like wall in the world, even more than longer than the Great Wall of China, a wall made of barbed wire and landmines
Oh my
that
gosh.
cuts Western Sahara like in half, where a lot of these people live. It's this conflict that's been going on for decades that so many people in the West have forgotten about, or maybe they never even knew about to begin with. So that was really fascinating to visit the refugee camps and kind of learn all about their situation and see that they have this film festival now, that they're kind of using film as this medium to kind of tell their story and get it out to the world. So that was
What was
really
you were there?
interesting.
You saw the film festival. What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, I was more, it's the first time I'd been there. This is like an annual event. So I was mostly just absorbing, just being, I'd never been to the Sahara Desert or anything, so I was just absorbing more of the experience of like being there and meeting the people and learning about the history and everything. I didn't even have much of a chance to like sit down and watch many of the films. But just, yeah, seeing the culture, and along with the film festival, they had like a cultural festival, and seeing like their dances and singing and everything, it was just super fascinating. It was all new to me. And yeah, I'd never been in that part of the world before. I still haven't really explored more of Africa. I really want to. But yeah, no, it was really interesting.
That's really cool. Tell me about Peru. Tell me about hallucinogenics. Let's talk.
Okay.
Let's talk about it.
So I went to Peru. I have this radio colleague who was living there. Her husband was like teaching English in Lima. And so she's like a fellow radio producer, public radio producer from the States. And so she decided, they had a free bedroom. So they said, well, we'll start to do this like informal, like radio residency program, so anyone could come down for like a few weeks and stay with us, and they charge very little. And so I went and stayed with them, and then I decided if I'm going down there anyway, I'll expand my trip. But it's pretty cheap in Peru, so I stayed for, I think, 4 weeks or something like that. And I'm a big fan of slow travel, and I love spending a lot of time in a place to really get to know it well. And like by spending so long there, more than just, I feel like it takes me like a week to 10 days to just really get settled and get my bearings and everything. And if I spend a few weeks, I get, like by the time I left that trip, I had so many stories I'd gathered. I met so many people. I knew my way around. I even kind of understood some of the inside jokes of the culture and everything. Like, it was great. And one of the interesting stories I found was that, I try to do a little bit of research ahead of time. And one of the places I look is Atlas Obscura, if people are familiar with that. It's this website that has interesting, quirky, things around the world. It's listeners or readers submit places. And I was reading about in Lima, there's this, they called it like a Mercado de Brujas, like a witches and wizards market, where, a lot of the traditional people in the countryside in Peru are very much into like medicinal kinds of some of it's almost like casting spells, voodoo kind of stuff, like shrunken head kind of stuff, and using natural plants to cure things or to cast spells or whatever. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of fascinating. I was staying at an Airbnb, and I spoke to the guy who ran it, Jeffrey was his name. He's Belgian, I think, but he had moved to Peru and lived there for a number of years. And I said, oh, I heard about this. I thought that's kind of interesting. And he said, oh, yeah, well, you should meet my friend Lucho, who's, he didn't like the word shaman. He thought that's kind of a negative connotation. He liked the word curandero, like a cure or a healer. And he said Lucho's a curandero, and he lives in the jungle out in Pucallpa, which is like edge of the Amazon on the other side of the Andes. And so we got Lucho on the phone, and Lucho took like a overnight bus trip to Lima to meet me there. And
Wow.
I ended up paying for his. I wired him some money for the bus trip, and then the two of us together ended up going on this other overnight bus trip up the coast of Peru to this little city of Chiclayo in northern Peru, which incidentally is where our new pope apparently was based for a while. And
Wow.
we went to this other like witches and wizards market there. It's like, again, this is a city like no tourist would know, because there's no reason to go there. There's really not much there, almost by the border of Ecuador. And we went to this other witches and wizards market to search for this star-shaped stone that supposedly had magical healing powers that Lucho had seen in a hallucinogenic vision he had. And so that was like, I wish every story of my podcast could be like this, going on this amazing adventure. You're like on a quest for something, like a quest for this magical, it was like a Harry Potter kind of thing or whatever. And so that was super cool. We didn't end up finding, again, this is on the second season of my podcast if people want to hear the whole story. We didn't end up finding the exact star that he had seen in his vision, but we found a similar one, but for complicated reasons I won't get into, we didn't end up getting it. But I kept in touch with Lucho, and then like a week later, he contacted me again, and he said that he asked if I wanted to come along to this ceremony that he was leading, this ayahuasca ceremony. If people know about ayahuasca, it's like this brew that's made up of roots and herbs from the jungle. People brew it together, and it's like a special recipe, and it's given in like these ceremonies that people have. It's not like a recreational drug. It's supposed to have healing properties, and it's like supposed to open up new pathways in your brain, and if you're having any kind of trouble, it'll help you somehow. And so I went along with Lucho to this little tiny shanty town. I mean, there's like, ayahuasca now has become this Western thing. I think there's even places in Brooklyn, like underground places where people are leading ayahuasca ceremonies, or there's retreats people go to in Mexico to, tourists will go to do it. But this was like the real deal. This was a real authentic in this little shanty town, sitting in these people's living room on these hard back chairs. It was super uncomfortable. And so I went along with him to this, ceremony there in these people's living room. And yeah, so everyone he passed it around this little wooden cup, and people drank a little bit of this, and just sitting there for hours, like observing this whole ceremony take place. A part of it, you drink this, it has this, he gave me a little tiny, I didn't want to do the full thing. I mean, I'm there as a journalist covering it, but I tried just a little bit to kind of see if I would get a sense of it. And it's super bitter, bad taste. Actually, not as bad as I was prepared for it to be, but it's still not pleasant. And part of the experience, not for me, but for people who had more of it, like it causes you to purge. So I have like hours of audio tape I recorded of sitting on this circle in these hardback chairs in the darkness, of sounds of people vomiting in buckets, which I was thankfully very judicious, and I only included a tiny little snippet of that in my piece because I didn't want to totally gross people out in my audio story.
I was gonna say you should have really experienced it for the full effect, but now I'm kind of, I guess I'm,
I
yeah,
mean, I
no.
was a journalist. I don't want to, I wasn't planning on doing it at all at the beginning, and I don't
Yeah.
really normally do any kind of drugs or anything, but I figured, okay, I'll try. I wasn't going to do it. And then he said, well, maybe you should experience it. So I said, okay, just give me a little tiny bit, like an ounce or whatever, to kind of get a little sense of it. And actually, it ended up having no effect on me or maybe my stomach was slightly upset for a few minutes, but then that kind of went away. And I was almost embarrassed. He kept checking in with me, like, are you feeling it now? Are you feeling it now? And everyone around me is having these crazy visions they're describing to him. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, no, like I was totally embarrassed that I was like, no, I'm still not feeling anything. So, yeah, that was interesting. But no, it was a fascinating to observe this whole thing taking place. And it was almost like at one point, like this woman who was like his assistant, who he was like training to lead these ceremonies herself, she like really had this full blown experience where she was like weeping, and it was like almost like he was casting demons out of her. It was like observing an exorcism. It was
Wow.
super creepy, and just yeah, I've never been anywhere quite like that before, and I captured this all on audio
I
so
was
people
going to
could
ask,
hear
like,
that
what
story.
what were your emotions like? Well, I know, as a journalist, you're supposed to kind of reserve all that stuff, but how could it not affect you in some way when
Yeah, I
someone's
mean,
going
I'm
through
just
something
like,
like that?
yeah, I'm just like, this is incredible. Like, wow, like I've never witnessed or experienced something like this. Like, yeah, it's crazy how everyone's in there. You're all just sitting in this same little dark room in a circle, but everyone is in their own headspace and having a totally different experience.
Now, he
And
wasn't actually partaking, right? Because he was
oh no,
leading.
he did. Yeah,
Oh, he
no, he did.
did?
That's part of it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, maybe that wasn't clear in the story, but yeah, no, he drank it just like everyone else. But I mean, he's done it so many times. So I don't know if he's kind of immune. I don't think he's immune to it, but
Can sort of control it a
he's able
little.
to, yeah, control it or something. I don't know. But
Wow.
yeah, for her it seemed like the experience was really like emotional. And I mean, my Spanish isn't great, but also it seemed like a very personal thing, so I didn't want to dive at it. It seemed like intrusive to ask her like, what was your experience, like what was that about. But then other people, it seemed like more joyous or more, like just people having different visions about different things, and it could literally be life changing in some cases for some of these people. So
That's
yeah,
incredible.
it was amazing to experience, witness.
Did you get time just to experience Peru not through a journalistic lens? Like, I've been
Yeah.
there once. It was for a short time. I really enjoyed my time in Peru.
Yeah. I will say I was just, aside from that short trip to Chiclayo, I was just in Lima because I really wanted to, like I said, I'm a big fan of slow travel. I wanted to get that, to know that one city and that one
Hmm.
area really well.
Which I will
So
say, and I touched on it on an early episode. I have a friend of mine who was born in Lima, actually, and he's been there many, many times because he still has family there. And I said to him when we went, I was told, "Don't worry about spending time in Lima because that's just where you go to get in and out of the airport and get to other parts of the country or whatever." And we spent like 3 days there, and I'm so glad we did because I really enjoyed Lima a lot.
yeah, I thought it was a cool city. I mean, I still would like to go to Machu Picchu and Cusco. I haven't been, but I figured I'll save that for a separate trip. But yeah,
Worth
no,
it.
I like Lima. I mean, especially when I stayed in Barranco, which is a really cool neighborhood, kind of a little bit south of the downtown. That's a super hip neighborhood. Always a lot going on there. And then the one really cool tip I'll give, and most people don't know about, I found this in like Airbnb experiences. Off the coast of Lima, there's a few like islands, uninhabited islands. It's like a protected wildlife preserve, and you could take a boat out there, and there's like thousands, or I don't know, maybe millions of like seals that live on these islands. And it's just incredible to see. They've like taken over these islands. It's like covering every square inch of space, and your boat gets close to them, and they're just making this incredible noise, and they're incredibly smelly. And it's super cool. And you could go swimming with them. Like you go in the water. I mean, it's a little bit gross because they're so stinky, and there's poop and everything. But they give you life jackets, and you actually lie in the water. You all kind of link arms, so you're like lying, in a row, floating in the water, and the little ones are coming up to you, and they're kind of nipping at your toes, and it was so cool. That's okay. I think if you ask me the coolest things I've ever done, so Chernobyl is one,
Hmm.
swimming with the sea lions in Lima was another, and a third would probably be going dog sledding in Alaska.
No way.
And there might be a fourth thing as well. I can't remember off the top of my head, but those are definitely some of the top ones. Yeah, dog sledding is amazing as well. If anyone ever gets a chance, it's, yeah, really
Were you
cool.
in
My brother.
Alaska also for a story, or?
No, my brother and I we went to Fairbanks. I won an award from a journalist competition for another story I did, and they gave me like a free hotel stay for a few nights in Fairbanks. And
Wow.
so I had never been, neither one of us had ever been to Alaska before. So we figured, sure, that sounds cool. And I think Alaska is the place where it's very different. Obviously, whether you go in the summer or the winter, it's two totally different experiences. But we figured we'd go in the winter, so hopefully we were trying to see the northern lights. Unfortunately, it's kind of hit or miss. You never know if even if the skies are clear. The Northern Lights forecast changes day to day, and we just barely saw it. Like, my brother's a photographer, and so his camera was able to capture it when he put it at the right setting. But with the naked eye, it was very hard to see, unfortunately. So we went. Yeah, we tried to see the Northern Lights. We went dog sledding, which was amazing. There's these hot springs there where so it was like 20 degrees below zero, but then you go in the hot springs, and you take your head, you dunk under the water, and then you're out for, I don't know, a minute or so, and then your hair ices up, like you could like sculpt it, however, and then you just go under the water again, and it'll melt. And so that was really fun. And then we did this thing called skijoring, which is kind of like, so you're on cross country skis, which I find, I've learned as a kid, we did downhill skiing. Cross country skis are a lot thinner than downhill skis, so it's hard enough for me if I'm not used to it. So like, it requires a bit more balance.
Mm-hmm.
But then the added challenge is, so you're on cross country skis, but skijoring, which I think originally it comes from Scandinavia or somewhere. There's like a dog that's like pulling you. So you have like a harness around your waist and it's attached to a line, and the dog is pulling you with the cross country skis.
What?
So
Why wouldn't
trying
they
not
use
to
other
come crashing down.
downhill skis, like wider skis?
Yeah,
more
yeah.
challenge.
You're not, and that's more of a local thing. That's not a thing that most tourists get to experience. We just happen to find some guy who was like trying to start up a business of taking tourists out on this thing, but it still hasn't really caught on as like a tourist thing. So that was a really fun experience we got to do.
That's awesome. Was there any control over the dog?
Not really. I mean, I guess you could kind of tug at the line he was pulling and try to get him to slow down. But yeah, the dogs kind of did what they did. They have so much energy.
Oh my gosh. It actually sounds like a lot of fun.
It was. If people visit my Instagram page and scroll back, they'll see videos of my brother and me and the dog sledding, crashing down. That was funny. Yeah, at that time of year in December or whatever, it was definitely cold. It was like 20 degrees below zero every day. Fairbanks, that's only the middle of Alaska. That's not even the far north, but still, I don't know, the sun would rise maybe about 10:30 every day and set by like 3:30 in the afternoon or something like that. So that took a little getting used to. But they have like a cool local, like, microbrewery scene, and there was always stuff to do at nighttime and everything. So it was a cool place, and and along with, like, I don't know, I think the friendliest people I've met in all my travels, like I said, Persians, in Iran, very friendly. Cubans, very friendly to meet Americans, and then Alaskans also. Because most of the people there aren't from there. So many people are we met people from Florida, from like all over the place. Like, why did you move to Alaska? Like, especially in the middle of the winter. Like, how do you survive these winters? But they really like it there. It's everyone has interesting backstories. It seems like we met some guy when we were out dog sledding who's originally from Boston. He still had like a thick Boston accent, and he just decided to become like a hermit or whatever, and he lives in this little shack way out in the middle of the woods. And he would go grocery shopping, and then he would, like, to get his grocery, he'd have to park his car, and then he has to like put on his cross country skis, and he had this little sled behind him where he'd attached to a harness, and you have to go on the cross country skis like 3 miles down this trail to get to his shack in the woods. I don't think it had, maybe it had electricity. I don't know. Probably not. I don't know. But it was just way out there. So, like, crazy lifestyle to think that he moved from Boston to there to live in this shack in the middle of the woods. But, it's beautiful in the winter. It's great. I don't think I would want to live in that much isolation. But it's just fascinating to meet all these people with different life stories and, different existences.
Yeah. Wow. That kind of reminds me of, I can't remember what state it is, but there's somewhere in the U.S., maybe it's North Dakota, I'm not sure, but there's part of the state that goes up into Canada, and in the wintertime when everything freezes over, like they literally, in order to even just like to get to work, because they come to work in like the main part of the state, they have to literally drive across the ice to get into like the regular part of the United States.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So when you've traveled, and we're kind of winding down, but when you've traveled not with a journalistic hat, because I know obviously when you travel in that way, your job is to talk to people and report the stories, right? Mm-hmm. When you travel on your own, it sounds like maybe you do, but do you seek people just sort of because of your own curiosities? Like, do you talk to locals anyway, just because that's what you like to do?
Yeah. I mean, every trip I go on, almost every trip I always bring a recorder. And so I'm trying to always see if I could find stories to record. But even if I'm not doing that, like I'm still interested in not, even if it's just a trip for my own enjoyment, I'm not just like going to the top tourist sites. And I mean, I do some of
Right.
that because I feel like, I
If you're
don't know, you can't
there.
go to Paris without seeing the Eiffel Tower. Like, you got to cross those things off your bucket list. But ideally, I stay somewhere long enough that I'll have time to also go and wander down back alleys and explore other neighborhoods and parts of the city that the average tourist wouldn't go to. And that's why I've been doing a lot of house sitting recently and pet sitting as a way to do like long-term travel for very little cost or for free, basically.
What a great
So
idea.
I'll stay at someone's apartment and watch their dog or cat, or sometimes even just watch their apartment. I specifically look for ones that are at least like a month long. It's great because I get to spend a lot of time in a place. It's not costing me anything. They usually don't pay, but I get to stay somewhere for free. And I have access to a kitchen, so I cook my own meals. That saves a lot of money and also gives me the experience of shopping at the local markets. And I love especially going to like tropical countries and going, getting all the weird fruits I've never seen before and taking them home and cutting them open and seeing what's inside. I always love that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I love that experience of like living in like an apartment instead of just a hotel or something. So I really feel like more of a local to like experience and spending enough time there that I have that experience. And then I'm able to like, I have the luxury of time. I don't feel like I'm rushing. It's not just like a vacation. Like I'm actually living there for a short time. And so then, yeah, I get to meet local people and have those experiences that, after I've crossed like the big major sightseeing things off my bucket list, I have time to go way farther down the list and find the interesting quirks and oddities of the place, and I'll explore all the random things I find on Atlas Obscura, or talk to local people and ask them about like cultural phenomenon that I'm interested in, that as well, like what makes like the interesting cultural differences between even a place is similar to the where I'm from, the United States, is like somewhere in Western Europe. Like when I spent a lot of time in Denmark and just Copenhagen, very Western country obviously, but there's interesting cultural differences in different like celebrations. And when kids, what is it, if they turn a certain age and like 18 or whatever, if they still haven't, or whatever it is, and they still haven't gotten married, then they'll like their friends will come and like dump cinnamon on them or something. And then if it's like 5 years later, then they dump pepper. Or it's like
Oh my
strange. Like
god.
it's like, or there's something else where like the little kids, like when they outgrow their pacifiers, like in a lot of the city parks, they have like a pacifier tree where you see all the old pacifiers like tied on the tree branches with like the names of the kids or whatever. And I guess they could go back and visit them and oh yeah, when you were a kid, this was your pacifier. So
Oh
just
my
interesting little cultural
gosh.
things like that maybe it's not enough for a full story, like an episode on my show, but maybe I could do an episode with like a bunch of the little quirks I found. But I just find that incredibly fascinating. Like even in a place that seems very culturally similar to what I'm used to, there's interesting cultural differences if you dig below the surface.
Sure.
I find that
Yeah.
really interesting.
I'm
Yeah.
sure we have different traditions and things that are, well, you know what? I shouldn't say that because most traditions and things come from your heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're all immigrants. So
Yeah.
maybe that's not true. Maybe maybe we don't have much that's fresh and unique in
Sure,
the
there's a
US,
lot of things
but
that foreigners would look at the U.S. and see, like, you do that way? Like, that's really strange. Like, why would you do that? But, I mean, the Japanese think it's gross that Americans, like, take baths. They're like, why would you want to sit in water with your
mm,
filth? Like, that,
mhm.
the things we take for granted that, So I think there's probably lots of things like that in every
Yeah.
culture.
So before we get to the point where I ask my final questions, what have we missed when you're sitting down with just a buddy you haven't talked to in a while, and they're a fellow traveler, and you're like, oh yeah, I did this, or I got to tell you about this story,
I think we've covered the main ones. Let's
something that
see.
was so like really touching to you, maybe, or if it's
Yeah.
if it's something that's personal, I don't want to,
No,
obviously, but
I'm trying to think of other places I've been. I mean, I've spent a little time in Japan. I love Japan. It's really cool. Got to go
the,
to the giant market in Tokyo where they auction off these enormous tuna fish, which I slept over line overnight on the ground in this market to witness. They have the auction at like 5 or 6 in the morning. And I got to go to Hiroshima, really well done memorial and museum there. I highly
mm,
recommend it if anyone ever gets to go. I've been across Thailand and Cambodia with my brother. Angkor Wat in Cambodia is really cool.
was going to ask you, how
Yeah.
often do you and your brother travel together outside of documentary stuff
Yeah, I mean, for a while we
or
were doing it
journalism?
every year over Christmas and New Year's,
Yeah.
and at a certain point we just stopped doing that. I don't know. I mean, COVID happened, and then he got married, and so we I don't know, we should do more traveling. And then he was saving up money for a house. But it's been a few years since we've taken a big trip. I mean, I guess the last one was he and his wife actually, they got married. They had like a destination wedding down in Oaxaca, Mexico.
Ooh.
So I went down for that, which was really cool. And I actually the wedding was in November. So I went a few weeks earlier so I could be there for Day of the Dead, which is a big thing down there, which was really fun and really amazing.
I
So I
can't even
highly,
imagine.
yeah, I highly recommend that if anyone ever gets the chance. It was so cool.
What kind of things did you see that like what kind of things did they do for that, I guess?
Well, I mean, every neighborhood in the city has its own like parade with these crazy costumes and stilt walkers and all kinds of like floats and just it's a very festive and colorful. And they have so there's this one there's like the normal parades and everything, and then there was this one little town outside of Oaxaca. They had this thing called the Murtiada, which it was I don't even know how to describe it. So the festival takes place like all night long, and you go and there's these crazy costumes, and a lot of them are really kind of really gruesome or blood and guts or like really creative costumes, and like each one is more incredible than the last, and you like there's this like all the people dancing. There's like a brass band that's going from site to site, around the town, and the people dance at each site. And at one point, like all the crazy costumes, like it felt like we were at the Monsters Ball or something. Like it was so cool. People just I have to go to my Instagram, Far From Home podcast, and go back, from a few years ago in October and look at it. I just don't even know how to describe it. But I think that I would add along with the other, well, along with Chernobyl, the dog sledding and the seals, going to the Murtiada outside of Oaxaca, it'd definitely be the other coolest thing I forgot to include.
Yeah, and I'm sure
Words can't even do it justice. It was just amazing.
with the music and all
Yeah,
the and all that, it's got to be unbelievable.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
it's such an important experience for them, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean that was the more festive, celebratory thing. But then also,
mhm.
obviously, at the cemeteries, they have people light candles and celebrating their relatives who have passed on. And a lot of countries in Latin America do this. Actually, that was a story I did in Peru. They have their version of Day of the Dead, which they call Dia de los Difuntos, Day of the Departed in Peru.
Interesting.
So yeah, each
Instead
country
of
has
muertos.
yeah, they it's a slightly different take on it, but a similar kind of thing where people would go to the cemetery. It was like one of the largest cemeteries in the world on the outskirts of Lima, and people would go and like camp out or not camp out, but they would like spend all night there, having like a vigil at the grave, and they'd bring like barbecue out there, and there'd be like freelance bands that would roam around the cemetery that you could hire to like play music at the grave of your loved one. Every kind of brass bands, like accordions, like everything you could imagine, guitars, like mariachis, and then night comes and all the candles are lit up, and it's just very beautiful and touching.
How awesome!
That
I
was
wish
really
we
cool.
had something like that. Like my heritage
Yeah.
just isn't like that, but I just think it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's just different ways that different cultures think about death. I have
Yeah.
to say that was one of the most interesting things on the Mongol Rally, just driving through all these countries and just seeing the cemeteries in all these different countries, how different they look. Whether they're actually below ground tombstones or above ground like crypts, or it was just fascinating to see how different cultures mark the graves.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to explore, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, this has been incredible. You're incredible. You can't believe the things that you do. It's nuts. And I know you've done more things that are, some people would just consider that you're crazy for doing. If, unless there's anything else, you're good. We'll wrap with my final 5 questions.
Okay.
So, did I tell you these ahead of time or did
You did not, so this is a
we
surprise to
left
me.
them to a
I'll do my
mystery? All
best.
right.
Okay.
So, question number 1 is, of all of the places in the world that you've ever been, excluding your own home, wherever you happen to have been living at the time, what has been your most memorable meal you've ever had?
Meal.
And obviously, it does not have to be in a restaurant. It could be anywhere.
Yeah, I might say it's hard, but I might say, well, it's tough. I remember in Costa Rica many years ago,
Love Costa Rica.
we met. My brother had a friend from, like, he was in high school, and like some kid he was on the lacrosse team with. Like, we met the mother or whatever. They had a home, or they yeah, I think they rented a place down in Playa Ubita, which is like along the coast in like southern Costa Rica. At that point, it was hardly developed. They were just starting to pave the road at that point. Now I hear it's I think it's a big popular beach town now. But at that point, no one was going there. And so we went down. She said, "Oh, it's a really like pretty area." So we went down. Not much there at that point. The beach was pretty. We walked along, and then there was a couple who lived there. I think he was European from somewhere, and his wife was Asian. And so they opened up this little restaurant on like the top of this hill. It was just like in their house, or so. I don't know. It was like an informal kind of thing. And so they like drove us to this place at the top of the hill in the back of their pickup truck. And we go there, and they brought out this, like, I don't know how many courses meal of, it was just incredible. I think it was like Asian food. I think his wife might have been Thai. And so a lot of the stuff she brought, that she like smuggled them on the airplane, like the lemongrass and everything, because it's
Oh
a
my
similar
God.
climate in Costa Rica. And so she was just growing these fresh herbs there. And
Wonderful.
she just cooked this meal. I just remember like the coconut rice and the everything. I just remember being really impressed by that, and all the courses of food they brought. And it was just like this secret hidden place that no one knew about. And unfortunately, I heard it doesn't exist anymore. I don't know how long it lasted after we were there. But that was a really incredible meal. And actually, the one other one, I love these like multi-course tasting kind of things. Actually, in Amsterdam, there's this culture in Amsterdam of, there's like I think a small, in addition to the community from Suriname, because that was a Dutch colony or whatever, there's a little community from Indonesia in Amsterdam. And so there's these Indonesian restaurants with this, it's like a uniquely Dutch phenomenon, because I've spoken to an Indonesian friend. He's never heard of this before. It only exists among Indonesian people in the Netherlands, where they call it or something. It's like rice table, it means. And so it's like a tasting kind of thing. They bring out like dish after dish, all like little dishes of all kinds of different colorful, tasty Indonesian dishes. And it's not really something you'd go to by yourself, but if you go with a group of friends, as I did, and we got the vegetarian version, but they also have one with meat. It's just everything was better than the last, and just incredible food, and getting to try all these different things. I highly recommend that if anyone's ever in Amsterdam.
So incredible. And do you find those sometimes, like when you're talking about a memorable meal, do you feel like it's more than just, even though the food maybe is incredible, it's more
Mhm.
than just the food that makes it, that was an incredible meal, because of maybe the company or the
Yeah.
place
Oh yeah.
or the service or whatever?
I mean, all those certainly can help. Yeah. I mean, if I'm there I'm probably not going to enjoy it as much if I'm just there by myself as if I'm with friends or family or whatever. And Yeah, the atmosphere. Like, I mean, there was an incredible meal I went to in Peru, which I didn't even mention, in Lima. I went to right in the Barranco neighborhood. It's one of the like fanciest restaurants in the world. Again, it was a tasting menu. I think it was called Central.
Yeah, it was the number
Um,
one restaurant in the world a few years ago. I was there.
yeah,
I was there, but I
yes.
was upstairs. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I did the whole tasting menu. I just went for lunch because it's a little cheaper than dinner, but it was still like $200 or something.
It
But
got to be more once they became the number one restaurant in the world.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
crazy. I mean, that was, even for me, 200. Like, that's a lot of money,
yeah, yeah,
and especially in Peru, like that's a lot of money.
yep,
But I figured I'll try this. And again, it's a tasting thing. It's more a place like that. You're not really going for the food. You're going more for the experience.
absolutely.
Because even by the end, I mean, it might stop, not totally fill you up. It's like little bits of lots of different things. And I mean, I felt a little bit like they were jumping the shark once they brought out the one plate which just had piranha heads on it, like staring up at me.
Gee.
It's like everything was just ridiculous. And they had a whole kind of, they brought out the menu, and it's supposed to like represent all the different like climatic zones of from the high mountains of the Andes to the rainforest to the sea
Hmm.
level, and so different things from different altitudes. And so it's very colorful. I took pictures of each of the dishes, and that was, again, it's more the experience than the food. The food was good, but it's, the novelty of it really. But I just went by myself, so I think I probably would be more memorable and more enjoyable if I was with if I had company that I went with. So to
Yeah.
answer your question,
I told the story again in episode 4 because my friend is from Lima, and he'd heard me tell it before, but he didn't remember it. So yeah, essentially when we were there, we did a food tour, and
mm-hmm.
as we were walking around, the person kept mentioning Central, and we had no idea that they
Mm-hmm.
had just been named the #1 restaurant in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we had no idea what she was talking about, and we had gone somewhere afterward, and we looking through our phones, we looked up the restaurant, and of course they're booked for like a year
Yeah.
at that point. But the next day, for some reason, they must have had something happen because they had 2 openings the next day.
Mm-hmm.
We thought, well, let's go. But at that point, for dinner, it was $1,000 per
Whoa.
person.
Okay, I would not pay that. Oh my
And
god, 200 was
so,
a lot for me. I would 1,000. My gosh.
yeah. And at that point, his wife, who was the head chef at Central for many years, and she had just been named the #1 female chef in the world. She opened her own place called Cajol upstairs.
Mm.
And so we looked that up too. And of course, that it had been named at the same time. It was named like the number 16 restaurant in the world or something like that. Like they were both
Okay.
way up there.
Yeah.
And so we looked at that, and she was booked for months. But the next day, again, there was just a couple of openings. So we thought, okay, well, that's only $500 a person.
Oh my gosh.
It's still not really in our budget for this trip. But when else did we get a chance to do this? And
Yeah.
I think her menu was very similar to what you mentioned. It was celebrating the different areas of Peru. And to their credit, like they're sourcing things from all over the place.
Oh yeah.
And again, yeah, I have pictures on my Instagram as well for the podcast. And it was fantastic. I mean, the food was incredible. And we did a pairing with, we did juices, we didn't do alcohol. But it was the presentation, it was the care and the
Yeah.
purpose that they put into every single dish. And the presentation was beautiful. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
really extraordinary.
Yeah.
So, okay, moving on. Question 2. Of all of the places in the world that you have ever been, where is the one place that you would not go back?
Everyone always asks me that, and the answer I usually say is Phnom Penh, Cambodia. It's not the most interesting city. I mean, pretty much everyone goes to Cambodia just for Angkor Wat and Siem Reap, which is really cool. It's amazing, and people should go there for that. We also went to this smaller city of Battambang in northern Cambodia, which was really cool. It's kind of a little off the beaten path, but there's some fascinating stuff there. And get to there's this bamboo railway, this old like it was an old rail lines that were like destroyed by the Khmer Rouge, but then enterprising local people took like lawnmower engines and like maybe set up little carts they made out of bamboo, and they rode up and down the rails so you could go and ride them there, which it was cool when we did it. Unfortunately now it's become super touristy, and it's not the same experience. They put like Toyota seats on the platform, and it's much more I know it sucks. So I'm glad we got to experience it while we were there. And we went on a local like tour that's some kids, it was like an organization raising money for street kids or something, and we went on a bicycle tour learning about all the local businesses, and that was super cool. I really enjoyed that, so that's cool. But yeah, Phnom Penh is really not a very interesting city. I will say that the Tuol Sleng, the Genocide Museum, is extremely well done, and I highly recommend that. I mean, granted, it's very dark, but it's a former like grammar school that was turned into like a torture center by the Khmer Rouge. And so you're going through the center, like you're literally seeing bookshelves with skulls of people they tortured and murdered in the school.
Oh my gosh.
But they have an audio walking tour you could take, and it was really well done. So if you can stomach that kind of thing, I highly recommend it. And there's also the killing fields nearby. After we went to the museum, we figured we had enough killing. Like we didn't need to see the killing fields also. But the city itself is just very scattered, and there's like stuff all over the place. I could never quite get my bearings. And there aren't a lot of like sights to see, or like it's just not really a tourist city very much. And there's several cities I've been to that are like that. Like you go, I guess you go more for the experience. That like Toronto is not the most exciting city. It's a great food city, but there's and the art museum is cool, but there's not that much in the city really. Or even Melbourne. I was just in Melbourne, Australia, and same in New Zealand, Auckland and Christchurch. Like the Auckland in particular is not a very interesting city. People don't really go to New Zealand for the cities. They go more for the nature. But yeah, no, Phnom Penh. I think people can, if they go to Cambodia, they could probably mostly focus on Angkor Wat, and that's probably the highlights, and they could most likely skip Phnom.
Yeah. So I think I'm creeping on 20 episodes, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
you're the first person that I've asked that question to that said, "Yeah, I get that. I get asked that question a lot."
Yeah.
Nobody's ever gotten that question,
Oh, really?
but you're in a unique position, so I get that. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, question 3 flips that 180 degrees. You've already mentioned, I think, a couple of places, but of all of the places in the world that you have never been, where do you absolutely have to go?
There's a few that have been on my bucket list forever that I still haven't been to Istanbul. I still haven't been to Buenos Aires. I've heard great things about Buenos Aires. I've really been wanting to go there for the longest time. And Portugal, like Lisbon and Porto. I actually have a good friend who just, fellow radio producer, she and her partner just bought a house to move to Porto. So I'd love to visit them at some point. So yeah, I think those are the three that come to mind that are on the top of my list of where I'd like to go.
And I'll tell you what, I bet you half of my episodes, someone has mentioned Portugal. So that's
Mm.
definitely going to be added to my list.
That's the new hot place now. Lots of digital nomads, people moving there. It's apparently, or at least it was up until now, one of the easier countries for Americans to get like visas to live there. But I think they're starting to tighten that up just because they've become overrun with so many people, which is understandably driving up prices for the locals and everything. It's always a balancing act.
Yeah. And I think you sort of touched on it, and I agree with you. There's definitely, when you go to certain places that are a little bit more tourist heavy, I am happy to go during an off season.
Yeah.
Sometimes when it's not the high season, I don't even mind if some places maybe are closed because
Hmm.
it's not the high season. I'm okay with that because I just want to experience culture anyway.
Yeah.
So, and maybe something like that, even going to Portugal, maybe I don't go to those specific places where the tourists go. I would still be happy to go and experience the culture elsewhere in the country.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
Hmm.
2 to go. Where of all of the places in the world that you have been do you absolutely have to go back to?
There's a lot of places I haven't been in many years. Like Costa Rica, I spent a summer there in college, like interned at this shortwave radio station that was like affiliated with the United Nations.
Oh, how cool.
And yes, I was there for a summer.
Was that in San Jose?
The station was out just outside of Ciudad Colon, which is maybe 45 minutes west, I think, of San
Okay.
Jose, a smaller town. But I was there for the whole summer, so I got to explore a lot of the country. Got to go to the beaches on the Pacific side, Cape Manuel Antonio. Got to and also play Montezuma farther north. Got to see like Poas, the big volcano, and got to Monteverde, the cloud forest, and the Arenal, the volcano,
Mm-hmm.
and then even got to go. My dad came to visit, and we went to the Caribbean side
I
to
love the Caribbean
Tortuguero. And
side.
so if
Yes.
you go in the right season, you can see these enormous tortoises laying eggs in the sand at nighttime. That was really
It's
amazing.
yeah, it's a huge thing there.
Yeah, yeah. So I know I think Costa Rica is probably even it's super touristy now, even more so than when I was there. But I've been really wanting to go back, just to like say hi to the people I knew when I was living with this woman there. I don't even know if she's still alive, probably not at this point. But just go back and see these places because I haven't been there since I was 22 years old or something. So it's been several decades.
Yeah.
So I really want to go back there, and also South Africa. I had a friend who was in Cape Town, living there. Cape Town's a really cool city, and I'd love to explore more of South Africa. So yeah, I think those are near the top of my list of where I'd like to go back.
Yeah. And I will tell you just from I've been to Costa Rica 3 or 4 times since like 2017. I'll tell you
Mm-hmm.
the roads are way better and they've
Oh,
gotten better
sure.
and better and better every time I've been. And
Mm-hmm.
they're even building, if they haven't finished it yet, it's got to be near completion, like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a super highway, but a highway that goes directly from San Jose to the West Coast.
Wow.
so you don't have to hit all those back roads and stuff. But
Yeah, yeah,
again,
yeah.
they've gotten
Wow.
better about paving most of the roads, and they're in much
Okay.
better condition than they used to be. And
Mm.
yeah, I love the Caribbean side for what it's worth. I want to get back there again at some point.
Is it much more developed now, or is it still pretty undeveloped?
It's been probably 3 years since I've been there. I didn't notice well, but I wasn't there when you were there.
Okay.
But I didn't notice it. Besides, some parts of the middle to upper West Coast are way developed
Yeah.
and more very touristy.
Mm.
But other than that, I felt like it was really just in their home. I did not feel like it was being catered to me in any way.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I really enjoyed it.
The cool thing about, have you been to Tortuguero, where the tortoises lay their eggs?
No, I have not.
So to get there, there's no roads that go there, and there probably still aren't. So you could either fly in on a little tiny plane, or you take a bus, or however you get to the whatever the port city is on the Caribbean coast, and then you take a boat up through the canals to get there. And then when you get to this little
Wow.
village, there's just like little ATVs riding around the village or whatever. That's it.
Yeah.
So it's very much kind of sort of off grid. Like the kind of scary thing is when I went with my father up there, and I remember there was this crazy thunderstorm one night, and we're in this like we're in this like little hotel, and this thunder, like the whole place was shaking, like it was almost like the lightning struck right outside the building or something, and we're like totally kind of off grid in the middle of nowhere, and that was kind of a little bit freaky.
Yeah.
But it was cool going up the boat through this canal just to get there, and the guide is like pointing out all these like howler monkeys in the trees, and we're like, how in the world is he seeing that? Like he had like eyes like an eagle to even notice these sloths and all these different things. It was really cool.
Yeah. The nature there is just, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, final question, and this is an easy one because you know the answer. What do you have planned? What's on the docket? Where are you going?
I actually, believe it or not, I don't have a good answer to that right now for the first time in quite a while. I mean, I was looking back at my calendar recently, and over the last 2 years, I was traveling. Like I was away from home about 70% of the time. So, and a lot of like long-term travel. Like I said, I've been doing like house sitting for people. So like last year, I'm trying to think of all the places I went. I have a boss who has a house up in Nantucket, so I was there for a while. I have a friend who wanted me to house sit for her out in Berkeley, California, just outside San Francisco. So I was out there a couple times. And then I was basically away from like July until, and then I was in Melbourne, Australia for like a month, and then I was in Auckland, New Zealand for like a month, and then my cousin flew out and met me. We did a driving tour around New Zealand, and I ended up in Christchurch for like another week. So I was away in Australia, San Francisco, Australia, and New Zealand from like July until Thanksgiving, which is a long stretch of time to be away from home.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've done a lot of traveling over the last few years, and also in Copenhagen a few times because I was working on this big documentary there. And by the way, I don't recommend going to Copenhagen in the winter. It's beautiful, it's lovely in the summer, but in the winter, it's so dreary and like raining every day, and you just don't even want to leave the house most days. I made the mistake of going back there in February because I needed to get a few more interviews for the story, and I do not recommend it.
Are the people in Copenhagen, they're super friendly, aren't they? Or are
Yeah,
they more
yeah.
reserved?
Um, Kind of a mix, I
Yeah.
think. I mean, there's definitely a part of the culture I think is somewhat reserved, but once you meet people, they're generally friendly.
I want to go. I
Yeah.
want to
No,
go.
it's a great city. I mean, on the face of it, it seems like it might not be that interesting of a city, but if you spend a little bit of time there, I like how modern and how clean and how advanced everything is. It's nice to like see the example of a country where yes, they have really high taxes, but look what you're getting for it. Like we're always Americans are always talking about cutting our taxes, and our infrastructure and everything is falling apart as a result. And meanwhile, there they have this beautiful subway system that actually runs 24/7. There's very few places in the world aside from New York where you have a subway that runs 24/7,
Yeah.
and there's no conductors. They like run themselves, like the airport monorail or something, and there's no advertisements in the subways. I'm like wondering
Wow.
at first, like something looks different. And I was like, it hit me, like, oh, that's what it is, because the government, they have tax money, it pays for it. They don't need the ad revenue, so it doesn't look all cluttered and dirty and messy,
You don't hear a
um,
governor every 15 minutes saying something about the city
yeah.
over the PA or.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. It's very clean, very efficient, very modern. it's just in so many ways, like, why aren't we doing things this way? Like, you could see how high the quality of life can be in a place like that. Now, granted, they have issues there as well, that, they're not like super friendly for immigration and for, other problems. They, like any society, they have their issues. But I feel like the US has a lot to learn from, Scandinavia, Western Europe. And I just feel like I wish more Americans would travel to see these instead of just saying America's number one. Well, have you been to these other places and they do all these certain things better than us? And,
Yes.
yeah, there's maybe some things we do better as well, but I feel like everyone has something to learn from someone else.
Preach.
So yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to your question. So yeah, I'm actually in between right now because I've been traveling so much over the last few years. I figured I need to spend a little bit of time at home right now just to catch up with stuff here. Because when you're away for months at a time, you get a leak in the kitchen ceiling, you get other things that happen while you're away. So I need to kind of stay home for a little while to attend to all that. And also, I have a house, or a basement rather, full of stuff that I want to get rid of to like sell on eBay or whatever, because I'd like to reach the point where maybe at some point a few years from now where maybe I could sell my house. And I don't know if I would become fully nomadic, but at least I probably don't want to stay in this area, even though there are conveniences living near New York. It's such a big city, and you could find anything you could possibly look for. I was going to say we're by several, big airports. It's easy to get places, though. The closest airport here is Newark Airport, which is not a good place to fly out of right now if you've been following the news recently. But it's just convenience sake. I grew up in this area, but I kind of take it for granted. It's interesting. People come from around the world. They come to New York and they think like it's the center of the universe, and I love this area. But or that's what they say. But for me, it's the more I travel, the more I realize that like how many other places there are that are far better than New York in so many ways. And so I really want to live somewhere else, ideally in another country. I don't know if I'd want to settle down in one place or if I'd want to keep moving around, but I want to at least be in a position where I could sell my house at some point to even consider that. So I've got to do a little bit of work on the house to even get to that point to do that. So that's one of my missions right now. And maybe I'll hit the road again in the fall or winter, but I'll be around at least till then. Not sure yet exactly where I'm going next, but I will say that one of my next big goals is to improve my Spanish to become totally fluent. So
Yes.
I probably want to, because that will open up the whole hemisphere mostly
Yep.
to me as a journalist. So probably want to next spend a few months somewhere in Latin America to really work on my language skills.
Excellent, man. Yeah, sounds like the dream. I'm right there with you. That's it's awesome, man. So honestly, Scott, I knew it was going to be a great episode. I knew we were going to have a lot of fun. It was really wonderful. Anything that you want to add? Anything we missed? Anything before we wrap?
I will just say, sometimes people are asking for advice as far as, they listen to my podcast or they hear my stories. And sometimes people say, well, how can I be like more adventurous? What can I do? And the advice I always say is like, you can start small. Like you don't need to like you don't need to drive to Mongolia like I did. Like you can just, and everyone has different comfort zones and different budgets and all sorts of things like that. But, even just in your own neighborhood, maybe there's some new restaurant that opened with some new cuisine from Nepal or something you've never tried, or that, it's like, or you like take a different route home from work someday, like explore a different area. Like you don't have to go to some random country on the other side of the world to have an adventure. Like you could have small adventures even close to where you are, and start small and work your way up. And maybe certain things might be uncomfortable to you at first, but take baby steps, and then maybe try the next thing. Adventure can mean all sorts of different things.
I agree 1,000%. I can't imagine there's any reason that you would have any documentary type stories or journalistic stories to come to Pittsburgh, but if you ever do, I'll show you around and we'll have a good time.
I've been to Pittsburgh a few times. I feel, I don't know, I had a friend who lived there and he absolutely hated it, but I think it's an interesting city. There's some cool things there. I especially like at the speaking of international stuff, at the university, they have each one of those classrooms from a different country. You know about that? I'm sure.
Yeah.
Of course you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really fun.
Yeah, that's at Pitt.
Yeah,
it's really
building.
Really cool. I was actually just asked I was a guest on another podcast, and she asked me where else in the U.S. would I like to live, and I said I thought, and I said nowhere. And I'm not from here. I've lived here for 15 years, but I just can't think of another place that I'd like to be, having been here this long. But yeah, this is wonderful. I hope you had a good time, and yeah, I hope we'll talk again sometime in the future. And
Okay, well, thank you. Yep. Sorry, go ahead.
and everybody, you have to check out. I'll put it in the show notes as well, and I'll put it on my socials once we get to this episode airing. But you have to check out Far From Home. Absolutely, it's really incredible what you've done and what you're doing.
Thanks so much for the plug. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for having me on. This is great speaking with you.
And there's another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast in the books. Thank you so much for listening today. It was another great guest with some great stories, as always, and I hope that you will support all of the guests by checking out the show notes and going to their web pages, seeing any socials and projects that they may have going on. And please, again, I'll ask as always to like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really does help to allow the podcast to grow and reach more people, and I appreciate you for doing that. Also, if you haven't done so, check out the website, whybpodcast.com, where you can find blog posts. If you'd like to be a guest, please register to be a guest on the site, and check out the merch page. There's some really cool stuff if you're interested in representing the pod, along with some other cool travel items and apparel that I'm working on every day as well. Join me again next week for another great guest with more incredible stories. New episodes drop every Sunday just after midnight Eastern Time. Until then, thank you for being here, and have a great day.